Welcome to the Republican Professor this morning. Actually, this afternoon. Let me get my time of day right. Pacific Standard Time. We have Matt Kirby with us. And Matt is joining us from Southern California, right?
That's right. Here, San Diego. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm happy that you're here too. I'm in California as well. I'm in Orange County, so I'm a little bit north of you.
I'm familiar with it.
You're the Confederate version of us, so we're having a Southern California gun owners Second Amendment discussion today. And I'm really excited because Matt is a brother in at least three different ways, as far as I can tell. First of all, we just found out we had the same mom, which I can't believe that. I just still can't.
What a shocker.
And I knew it. I freaking knew she had another family somewhere. Just all the late nights. No, just kidding, Mom. Just kidding. Okay. Sorry. But no, Matt is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps. So another military veteran. Yeah. Thank you for your service, brother. Matt is from the South, which I'm not from the South, so we're not brothers in that sense. But Matt is a military veteran. He's a philosopher trained at Biola University's graduate program in philosophy. So we'll get to that a little bit. And also a gun owner, a person who is adamant about protecting the Second Amendment. Would you say that's a fair characterization, Matt?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay.
I've spent time thinking about this and talking with people about it and advocating for it. And that's why I was really interested to read this book because I have some interest there. I was curious about a lot of things that Dr. Austin had to say, but yes, I would agree with that characterization.
Oh, okay. Yeah. You just mentioned Dr. Austin. You're talking about this guy?
I am.
God, Guns in America. God, Guns in America is a book. We asked him if he wanted to be on. He said he was too busy. So, I mean, we'll keep asking and we'll see if he wants to come on. I have a feeling
Hopefully
he just doesn't like us, but but I mean, that's just because I've been around Democrats for a long time. But anyway, yeah, his name is Mike Austin. And he wrote this book, God, Guns in America. He's actually a graduate of Biola as well. He did the philosophy program just like we did. Matt, let's before we get into that, let's talk about you a little bit. You grew up in the South. How come you don't have an accent?
You know, I get asked that probably 90% of the time I meet people and I tell them I'm from Louisiana. And I don't have a good answer for that other than I just never picked it up. But I have friends who sound like they could be on Duck Dynasty, you know. So you want me to put it on, I can, but I just never got it. I don't know.
And Matt, you grew up in Louisiana. You joined the Marine Corps Reserve, and you end up being deployed. Tell us about your deployments. Where did you get deployed? How long? And what was that like?
Sure. Well, 9/11 happened when I was a freshman in high school, and I remember that very distinctly. And that playing out was sort of in the background as I was graduating high school, and I was starting to think more and more about joining the military and thinking it was something that I wanted to do to give back, and it was a way I could serve. And there were superficial reasons for that too. You know, I liked doing the sorts of things already that you do in the military to a certain degree. I like shooting, I like camping. You know, obviously it's not as romantic as that all the time, but nevertheless, those are some of the things that played into that. And then I felt like if I didn't do it when I was young, I would never do it. So I was planning on going to officer candidate school. And so my first year of college, I was at Louisiana Tech. I was training for officer candidate school pretty heavily. And then I got a little bit impatient with the application process and decided, well, if I was going to lead enlisted members, then I should have some enlisted experience. And the officer selection officer did not recommend that because I think they know that what happens is people get in, they kind of have their fill, and then they actually don't go to officer candidate school, which is exactly what happened to me. Interestingly enough, my younger brother ended up becoming an officer in the Marines, and he's out now. But so I got that officer fix vicariously through him. But I joined, and I wanted to, I just felt very strongly about the fact that there were people, namely Al Qaeda, the Taliban, people like that who had nothing better to do than to sit around and think of creative ways to harm innocent people. And I thought, well, the best way to do something about that directly would be to be in the Marine Corps infantry. So joined at 19 after a year of college, and then did college throughout while I was in the reserves, but deployed to Iraq in 2007, a little town called Barwana, which is right on the Euphrates. And then in 2010 went to Afghanistan. And the first time to Iraq, we were actually attached to a reserve unit out of Memphis, Tennessee. But when we went to Afghanistan, that was our unit that actually deployed to Helmand Province near South Marja area. So those deployments were mild as far as combat deployments go. They typically use reserve units more for security missions and that sort of thing, which is what we were doing, holding a position, making sure people weren't planting IEDs around. And, we were doing patrolling and a few raids and things here and there, but, grateful that we didn't lose anybody on either of those deployments. You train for a certain type of job. And so there's a sort of superficial and naive frustration when you don't get to do the full extent of that job. But at the same time, I think in hindsight, you're grateful that you don't have the PTSD that some people deal with, or that you didn't lose buddies and things like that. So grateful for those experiences though.
Well, that's quite an experience. Yeah. What was the weather like in Iraq?
We were there in the winter, so it actually snowed on us once, which, of course, everybody grumbled about. We went out in the dark on a patrol. It was snowing, and it hadn't snowed there in 50 years or something crazy like that. And
global warming.
So it was actually, it was actually quite cold. So sometimes we'd go out in the middle of the night and sit out in the desert to watch things, and it was just this cutting winter wind, But there were times where the weather was mild and it felt really nice, and it was actually kind of peaceful to walk down by the Euphrates, where it's actually very lush. There's desert, and then next to the river, it's all very, very lush and pretty, and pomegranates and everything. It was kind of nice.
Wow. Well, what was it like in Afghanistan? What was the weather?
It was hot. It was very hot.
Mm-hmm.
It got, it was well over 100 there. Not where we were was certainly not as beautiful, but it was right south of Marja, which is sort of a big city there, and we were trying to maintain security on a very large. It was basically tracks through the desert, but it was a big road that they used for logistics, and that we used for logistics, and so it was kind of an important route. But we had about a 1.5 kilometer square area of operation for our particular platoon, and then we had other platoons strewn along the road. So we would actually do this interesting thing where we would we had vehicles that we would share. So each squad would take a turn with our 3 armored vehicles. So we'd go out to positions in the middle of the desert where it was in between where the cameras from the different positions could see, because there were these sort of blind spots, and we would kind of coil up we called it the coil. So we'd coil up our armored vehicles out in the middle of the desert and basically camp for a night to have a presence and make sure that nobody was going to be there digging bombs into the road or anything. And those are some good times. So like once the sun went down, it was cool, and you could see the stars. There was no light pollution. Looking at the stars with night vision was kind of cool. You see a lot more than you can with the naked eye. And
wow.
So it was hot though, so was ready to get out of there.
What did you carry? Both deployments, what did you carry as far as weapons?
The first deployment, I was the assistant gunner, so I had a M16 and a underslung grenade launcher. And then in Afghanistan, I was a squad leader, so I had an M4, and I liked the grenade launcher, but the M4 was a lot easier to carry and manipulate and stuff. So I like that.
The squad leader has an M4, but everybody else has an M16. How come?
Typically, they give smaller weapons to people whose primary job is something else than exercising a lot of firepower.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, machine gunners often.
What's the barrel length on an M16? Is it 20 inches?
I've forgotten. Something
18?
like that.
Maybe not 20.
Yeah,
that sounds kind of long. 18, maybe.
Yeah, I've already forgotten all that. But
your M4, was it a short barrel rifle?
California would call it a short barrel rifle, but it was it was shorter than the M16.
Okay. Well, Matt, you came back and somehow thank God you're in one piece. You
My
came
mom's
back
grateful
into
for that too.
your mom is?
She's grateful for that. Yeah, she's still celebrating the fact that I came back in one piece, as you can imagine.
I can imagine that. Yeah. Are you going to tell us how you got into philosophy? How did that, were you reading philosophy at all in the Marines when you were deployed on downtime?
Yeah, I was. That was actually a really good time to get a lot of reading done because, in between actually working, there was a lot of downtime. And I've always
hurry
liked,
up and wait. Hurry up and wait.
Yes, there was definitely a lot of waiting. And so I read a lot. I got into philosophy over the years through apologetics. When I was in high school, I went to Summit, and that was like, it was like flipping a switch in my mind and my soul for engagement with people that had different worldviews and understanding the extent to which Christianity was this rich worldview that touched all these different areas.
How old were you when you went to Summit?
16, I think, 16 or 17.
Okay.
And
so that's
and
pretty
that whole
young. That's
story
pretty young.
Yeah. This is a tangent, but I'll quickly back up and tell you the story of how I got to Summit. Well, when I was 2 years old, my mom was dealing with me and my brother as babies, and that could be pretty mundane. So she would listen to the radio when she was at home dealing with us. She heard Ryan Dobbs.
This is you based on your memory, your recollection as a 2-year-old?
No, this is her telling me later.
Oh, okay. All right, I got you. I was going to say, what kind of 2-year-old do we have here? Okay, what kind of person are you, Matt? A very special
2-year-old.
Matt.
I wish I could claim to have those sorts of powers. That would have helped me in
that would have scared Al Qaeda away. Right there. Boom. We would have won the war right there.
My mom heard Ryan Dobson on the radio kind of give this glowing review of his experience from Summit. And she felt so strongly about that when my dad came home from work that day, she said, well, I don't know where the boys are going to be when they're old enough to go to this, but if we need to sell a car to send them there, we should. So sure enough, was that 14 years later, she comes to me in the summer and says, hey, we want you to go to this thing. It's called Summit. And, typical high schooler, I'm like, I don't want to waste my summer doing something that doesn't really sound that exciting. So I said, well, just give me the books. I'll read the books. She said, no, we really want you to go. So I went, and then I didn't want to leave. I don't remember all the people who gave lectures, but I just remember thinking I couldn't get enough of the intellectual stimulation that I was getting from the lectures and the books that we were reading, and coming out of there, that just never went away. So I really came out of there excited about apologetics. Eventually outran my apologetics training. People would ask me questions, and I would get in discussions with people, either online or in person, and I couldn't answer those. So I had to really dig into getting into philosophy proper. And so once I was in the Marines, I was doing a lot of reading in philosophy, not really structured. I would just be interested in ethics. So I'd read Kant, or I'd, be interested in, I don't know, something else. So I'd read some other book on that topic. But as I was getting ready to finish up my time in the Marines and graduating from undergrad, in which I studied graphic design, it occurred to me, well, if I'm so interested in philosophy, why not pursue that formally? So I knew about Biola through the work of J.P. Moreland, Bill Craig, and some of those guys. And so I figured if they're on staff there, it has to be a good place. So I actually applied first to the Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics, didn't get in, and then applied at Talbot and got in there.
You applied where first?
The Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics.
Oh, where's that at?
It's in Oxford. It was.
So you're not a Muslim? Okay, hold on a sec. You're a Christian?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay, not a Muslim. Matt is not. I'm gonna have to talk to Marcy. She put my package. She put the package together on my. Marcy lives.
Could have been my handwriting.
No, it's fine. If you were a Muslim, I was excited to have you on as a Muslim. It's just going to throw the whole interview off. I have to reschedule. Okay. Well, we'll figure it out. I'll tell you what, let's just go with it. We'll keep recording. I'll talk to Marcy. All right, sorry. So you're in, it's funny you mentioned Ryan Dobson. What was that? What year was that you were 16 and went to Summit?
That had to have been 2003.
Was this before?
2003.
Oh, so that was after 9/11?
Yeah, 9/11 happened when I was a freshman in high school.
Well, you were a man when 9/11 happened. You were a fresh man.
Very fresh.
It's funny. When I arrived at Summit when I was 14, Ryan Dobson was the first person I met there. This kid from Diamond Bar, California. That's how he introduced himself. He had bleach blonde hair, looked like a surfer, and talked like a surfer too. He had this tan, and you know how they have the bleached eyes and the, just looked like a California guy, just a typical California guy. Later, I ended up moving to California and working in Diamond Bar, and he looked nothing like anybody else in Diamond Bar because they're all Chinese. So I guess Ryan Dobson was the only Chinese guy running around Diamond Bar. I don't know why he said he was from Diamond Bar, but that's what he said. Maybe he didn't say he was from Diamond Bar, but somehow I got Diamond Bar anyway. But Ryan Dobson was, the first kid that I met there. He was right there to greet my grandpa when my grandpa pulled up. And so that was in 1989, a little bit before your time.
Wow. I think that was the time that my mom was hearing that thing on the radio.
Oh, is that right?
Must have been. Yeah,
that would have been from him. He did have a positive experience there, and he had a skateboard, as I recall, which did not surprise me at all. And he looked, Anyway, so that was my time meeting Ryan. He wouldn't remember me, but I remember him.
Interestingly, when I was at Summit, I was at the campus in Dayton, Tennessee, so at Bryan College, and they put us up in the dorm rooms there. And my roommate was Norm Geisler's nephew. I think his name was Nathan.
Oh, is that right?
He was a little bit older than me at the time, but I was thinking about joining the Air Force. And so small world.
And he had a last name, Geisler?
I don't remember.
Different last name?
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. So you got to Biola. You got into Biola. And what was your favorite class that you took in the MA philosophy program?
That's tough. I would say
tough.
Probably philosophy of mind. If I had to pick one. I probably grew the most taking symbolic logic. That was the first one that I took, and that was a challenging, very challenging.
Who taught that?
Formative. Tim Pickavance.
Symbolic logic.
I didn't realize it was an elective. I thought I took it. I signed up for it, assuming symbolic logic has got to be one of the requirements of this degree. And it turns out I took it, and I was like, man, that was painful. And they said, actually, that was an elective. I would have taken it anyway, I think. But yeah, symbolic or philosophy of mind, or probably
who taught mind? Who taught mind? JP.
JP. Yeah.
And who taught metaphysics?
JP. Though that was about the time that Dallas Willard passed away, so he was in and out a little bit during that time. So we had a few guest speakers, Tom Crisp and some others. But what's
Tom Crisp know? I mean, seriously.
A few things, apparently, according to Alvin Plantinga, he was.
According to Alvin. Well, but what's Alvin Plantinga know?
I know, right?
I mean, I know he's rational about a bunch of stuff, but what does he know? These are dumb inside jokes. Okay, so that's cool. So did you take epistemology?
I did. I took that one with Tim as well.
Okay. And Tim did an okay job on epistemology?
Just okay. Yeah.
How would you know? How would you know?
That's a good point.
That's good. Anything else stand out to you from that time?
It was a great time. I mean, it was a completely different experience than my undergraduate experience for a couple of reasons. One, it was a, small private Christian university, which automatically makes it very different than a large public university like Louisiana Tech. But in grad school too, people are typically in grad school because they want to be there. They're not just kind of sliding into the next thing, which is what a lot of people do for undergrad. And so everybody that I was studying with was just as excited about the material as I was. And so we would go to class and then we'd, hang out later and just argue for hours about the stuff that we were learning. And I was around people, and some of them are still dear friends now, but that were way smarter than I was. And so those conversations were very helpful in reinforcing my understanding about some of the material. And I tell people I would take those classes again if I could justify it.
Absolutely.
Because,
absolutely.
My retention of all that is pretty bad.
Did you record the lectures at all?
I did, yeah. So I have.
I'm gonna have to ask you to. So if I need to brush up on some things, be good.
Well, I have some raw recordings.
Okay. So you didn't edit out all the cuss words and stuff?
I didn't edit out JP calling everybody idiots routinely. No.
That's good.
But it was a fantastic time.
I have recordings too, but they're on tape. So
I don't even have a way to play those.
A little bit different of an experience that I had.
Speaking of tapes, the very first memory I have of any explicit apologetics training was my dad and I on some road trip listening to R.C. Sproul's tapes, Defending Your Faith. I think that's what it was called. And it was just him going through logical arguments and explaining how syllogisms work and giving arguments for God's existence. And that was very enlightening for me. And there was something very satisfying about realizing that to go from premises that lead indisputably to a conclusion, there was something just very, that resonated with me about that. And so I never lost that.
Yeah. Now, how long did you take to complete your degree there at Biola? A couple years?
Let's see. I started January 2013 and I graduated fall of 2015.
A couple years, couple and a half years.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, you're taking a lot of classes at that time then.
Yeah, it was a full load.
Taking a full load, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Now you probably noticed about the Biola curriculum that it doesn't really go into detail much about politics. And it seems like did you think about that when you were there? Did you think about political implications, or how did you process that? Did that even come up for you, thinking about politics, political philosophy, constitutional law?
I had informally been interested in those subjects. I didn't really search out classes on those subjects at Talbot. I know that like Scott Waller teaches political philosophy or political science at Biola, but at the graduate level, I don't know that they have any classes on that. I would have been interested in taking that if they had offered an elective in political philosophy. I would have been very interested in that. Because I read two treatises on government, Locke, and it just amazed me that was not required reading as a young student or something. In Western civilization or something, as a high schooler, I should have been forced to read that book, I think. Because
do you think you would have read it and actually appreciated it at that younger age?
I think so. I was an avid reader even as a young person. My dad read to me when I was young, and I always had a love of reading. So I was one of those nerdy kids who enjoyed his poetry assignments and all that sort of stuff in high school. I would have grumbled about having to write a report on it or something, but I would have enjoyed the content, I think. And it's a difficult read, but at the same time, the systematic thinking that he goes through, explaining the conditions for forming a government, for dissolving a government, are things that I doubt many of our politicians have even read, and should, because it's so fundamental to the origins of the country.
Yeah. I mean, maybe they read it, but it didn't stick, or maybe they were in a place where they read it in a highly critical environment, and they felt like they had to get on board with that highly critical environment, and maybe they just it didn't really sink in. I don't know. Who knows? It's hard to know. Of course, it depends on which politician you're talking about.
That's right.
Well, so did you grow up around guns?
I did. Yeah, I tell people I came out of the womb with a gun in each hand. You know, we grew up hunting, and we didn't have land to hunt on, but we had a lot of friends who did, so they would invite us to come hunting, and I always loved being outside and doing that sort of thing. My dad was very keen to teach us how to handle guns safely, so we always had a great reverence for the proper safety. And I mean, a lot of those things have stuck with me. You know, when I take new people shooting, I'm very hyper aware about, you know, where the muzzle is pointing and all that sort of thing. Always shooting a gun as if it's loaded, and those good, you know, basic principles. So we grew up around that. It wasn't a big deal. My dad never bought me a BB gun because he didn't think I would, or my friends would treat it seriously, but he bought me a 22 rifle at 7 years old. And,
Seven,
you know, which
wow.
sounds counterintuitive. You know, it sounds like, why would you buy a child a rifle before you buy them a BB gun? But he knew that I would treat the rifle seriously. And it's not like I, you know, was able to just keep it in my room and do with it what I wanted. I mean, he had it, you know, but we would go use it. And
I didn't get a 22 until I was 22 years old. When I was 7, I got a 7mm because that's just how my parents thought. And then at 9, I got a 9mm. You know, when I turned 40,
your gun just got weaker and weaker, huh?
Son of a gun, I got. Yeah. That's funny. Well, if you don't know the calibers we were just referencing, then too bad, so sad for you, because you just missed out on a great joke. How were you able to handle that 22? Did you shoot it? Did you shoot it right away?
Yeah. We went out and shot it. I think I got it for Christmas, so I went out and we went and shot it that day or later that day. But
you went outside in the backyard and you were like,
well,
let's
I wish our backyard
zero these iron sights in.
Well, we lived in a neighborhood, so unfortunately, that's why I wanted a BB gun so bad, because I could use that in the neighborhood, but I couldn't use the rifle.
Yeah.
But we went out and shot it, and I actually did one competition once, a 22 competition. There was a police station. It wasn't in Ruston; it was somewhere else, maybe closer to Baton Rouge. They were having a competition, so I went and shot and ended up, you know, placing at least, and that was a fun experience. You know, we were there. They let us shoot one of their sniper rifles. I think it was a 308 or something with a massive scope, and it was, you know, 500 yards away or whatever. That was a fun time. But I never got into regular competitive shooting.
What kind of 22 was it? I'm trying to picture the model.
It was a Remington, I think. It was a polymer stock, black, with a little 10-round banana clip, banana magazine.
So it was like did you say it had a nylon stock or was it a nylon? Polymer, was it a Mohawk or something? I don't know if they make those anymore.
It wasn't a high quality one. I mean, I think it was decent, but it wasn't.
Yeah, I know. I can picture the one you're talking about. I forget what they call them. I think it's named after an Indian of some kind, like a Mohawk thing, or anyway.
It might be.
But yeah, I know the one you're talking about. I think I actually have one myself. The first one I got was a Marlin 60, Model 60. Do you know those? They still make them. Yeah.
No, I think my grandfather had a Marlin 22, but I've never owned one.
They're pretty standard. They pretty much all look the same. The only difference with some of the models is there's one called a Glenfield Marlin 60, and a Glenfield has artwork on the stock. It's got a little squirrel etched into each side of the grip, and it's got some like what do they call it? Engraving on the stock. So it's a little bit nicer.
Is it a lever action?
No, it's a semi-auto. The magazine is a tubular magazine, goes down the barrel, underneath the barrel. And I think the magazine holds like over 15 rounds. And it was fun. It was a fun rifle. I got that when I was in 7th grade, and
You still have it?
yeah, still have it.
Yeah, those are fun guns.
It's and I know my uncle had it for a while, and I could tell that's my rifle because it's got the same nicks and bangs that I remember I remember very clearly when it got those bangs. I remember dropping it on the rocks in the mountains. We were up um, doing a little target practice on. Well, I'll say it. I was in junior high, and yes, we did have somebody there that was over 18. I can't remember how old he was. Jimmy Balden. Okay. For those of you who know me, it was Jimmy Balden that drove us up there, and Danny Balden and Danny Schisler. And we were up there on Guanola Pass, and we hiked above timberline, and we're up, and it's just a bunch of boulders up there, and they're deer, and there's stuff up there, and there's what we call whistle pigs. And whistle pigs are what everybody else would call a marmot, and they whistle. And there's also these other little things called pica, and they're basically just like timber. They're mice that live above timberline, and they live in these rocks. And so we were shooting at the pica, and there's tons of them. I mean, there's millions of these things.
I haven't seen pica.
Yeah, they are. I think they would be classified as a pest or something like that. But
you had to be
anyway,
good to hear them, though.
did I have a small game license? I probably did, because I was, I was a dork, and I don't know if I bought one. Maybe, I don't know. I can't remember. But normally I had one. So was the activity I was doing legal? Probably. It was probably legal, but I dropped my 22 rifle on those rocks, and the stock got a little bit banged up, and there's a nick on the barrel, and it's been there ever since. And I know exactly where it is, and I'm like, that's my rifle, because that reminds me of 7th grade or 8th grade, whenever it was when I went up there. I think it was probably summer after 7th grade or something. And it probably wasn't really that great to shoot with those rocks in the background because of ricochet. So we switched to BB guns, and we actually had a lot more fun with the BB guns. And
you know what you're doing? You can do some damage to some pica with the BB.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I would shoot mice in our garage with my BB gun, and I remember getting one right in the eyeball, and he twisted around. So anyway, we're totally horrifying people, I'm sure.
Told that war story for a while, huh?
Well, I these are the memories I have growing up. Just love learning about.
I loved hunting.
Yeah, learning how. If there's something about knowing that you could get something to eat if you had to. And our friend Jim that was driving, he had a 223 bolt action, and that thing was really fun, really dialed in. He had a scope on it, really nice. Anyway, so you're growing up with guns. You serve in the military. Did you continue the tradition of gun ownership in California?
Yes, I have. Yeah, and growing up, my grandmother had a cabinet full of really old guns, and they were so interesting because
how cool is that?
They're very ornate, and every time we go to visit, I just go straight to the gun cabinet and open it up and just kind of look at what was in there, and they smelled a certain way. And
does she still have what's her address? Does she still have it?
Yeah, well, she's since passed away, but my dad has some of those guns, and I've actually done some research into some of the markings. And there's these really unique guns, like these German drillings, with the 3 barrels, the 2 shotgun barrels, and then the 1 rifle barrel underneath. Wow. And pretty interesting history on some of those. Yeah.
Wow.
But yes, the guns that I in fact own. I brought out to California and have had here, and certainly plan to grow the collection because they're just they're interesting. It's like some people are into watches, some people are into cars. I think it's fun to look at different types of guns and the craftsmanship there and stuff too, and to shoot them.
That aspect of gun ownership is fun because of the history. There is a lot of artwork and craftsmanship and engineering involved in the history of firearms.
And old guns have a story. They have markings on it. I have this one. My in-laws got me a Polish variant of the Mosin Nagant, and it's a shooter grade, which means it's kind of beat up, but it has all these interesting markings that came from the different armories that it was refurbished in over the years, and when it passed different hands, and so to look up those markings in the history is sort of interesting because they all tell a little bit of a story. You wonder whose hands that rifle was in.
What got you into this book that Mike Austin wrote, this God, Guns in America?
Well, I don't remember where I heard about it, but when I was at Louisiana Tech, I became involved with Students for Concealed Carry on campus and helped establish a chapter there. Did some lobbying on behalf of some campus carry bills. And then when I moved out to California, ended up becoming the California director and then the West regional director for a while, just kind of helping coordinate efforts a little bit on a part-time basis, and enjoyed doing that work, but eventually just got busy doing other things, doing grad school and other sorts of things, and so kind of stepped away from that. But when I heard about the book, I was interested to read it because it sounded like it was going to touch a bunch of subjects that I had been somewhat familiar with, and I was interested to hear what Mike Austin had to say, and was glad to have read it. I read it and took a bunch of notes and began writing a formal review to it, and appreciate something.
Are you intending to publish this review?
Potentially, yeah. I'm not sure where it would go, but anybody that's willing to take it, well, not anybody, but I'm open to publishing it.
Well, what are your thoughts on the book?
Well, first of all, I thought that Mike I haven't met him in person, but he seems like a sincere believer and a thoughtful guy. I know that he's well trained in philosophy, which is why, despite appreciating some of the criticisms that he has for the bad arguments and some of the attitudes that people have in idolizing gun ownership in the U.S., I thought there was quite a bit lacking with respect to the rigor and the consistency that one would hope to see in a book criticizing certain arguments and certain beliefs that people have towards guns in the U.S., because it's something that I've spent a lot of time with and thought a lot about. And there's the beautiful thing about the gun debate is that a lot of the arguments are based around empirical data that we have. So there are principled arguments, and then there are data-driven arguments. And the reason I got involved with Students for Concealed Carry in the first place was that, to me, the data that I had encountered fully supported the idea that adults who possess concealed carry permits already should be allowed to carry on campus if they can carry other places. And that's a very, there are Students for Concealed Carry is basically a one item platform, and that's it. It's if you're an adult that has a concealed carry permit, then if you can carry other places, you should be able to carry on campus. But obviously, my understanding of the gun debate went beyond just that particular bit of activism. So I'm getting far afield from your question about the book, but that's why I was interested to read the book, and that's why I had a lot of thoughts about it as I did read it.
Yeah. When you say that your thoughts about the debate go beyond that one narrow question, do you think that you have insights that others miss if they just focus narrowly on that one question? Or how would you put it? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but.
Well, I just mean that the attempts by Students for Concealed Carry are very, very narrow.
Yes,
that's useful from a point of activism, because
sure.
Then you're not trying to spread yourself too thin on different legislative grounds, and it's one that I think is very easy to to win people over on, because the data just support people being able to do that. We have universities that allow people to carry. We have some states that force their universities to allow people with permits to carry. Some leave it up to universities, and you just don't see the Wild West scenarios that opponents have typically forecasted. But I think that my own interest in guns is, beyond the superficial of just liking guns and that sort of thing, is more rooted in the real value that the founders obviously saw in the right of individuals to own and firearms. Because I think that what Austin does in the book is attack soft targets, which are people that have this very paper thin view of political philosophy and maybe even theology, and they talk in slang and shorthand about those things, and so it sounds very uncareful. And obviously there are people who have bad attitudes about it, glorifying gun violence in an unhealthy way or something like that. But I think that a lot of times people in, sort of on the right, who are already familiar with the gun debate, just take for granted the significance that the founders saw in the right to firearm ownership, and speak in shorthand without making the careful distinctions about, certain aspects of the argument or the attitude towards those things. And so it kind of comes across, at least to Austin, as people mixing their guns and religion, and kind of getting out there with like a Bud Light in one hand and a shotgun in the other, and like shooting up in the air and saying "Yay America" or something like that. That's kind of the person that he's attacking in the book. But and he makes a concession that not everybody thinks that way, or that everybody has that attitude. But the tone you get of the book is that it's really trying to smuggle in attacks on what I think are, in some cases, valid arguments in favor of less gun control restrictions, and by using Christian nationalism as sort of this soft target, right? Because I'm critical of Christian nationalism too, but I think if you have criticisms about
what's Christian nationalism?
Well, he gives some specific criteria in the book. I forget all of them, but one of the ones that I think is worth being criticized is, let me see if I have it here. Says
are you looking at your chalkboard that you made your notes on?
That's right. Yeah, I have notes. One of the tenets that he says Christian nationalists hold to is that conservative Christians are superior and have a right to rule over America. Now, obviously, I think that's wrong. I think that
you're saying that's not what the View says, or that's the
view.
No, that's what the View says, but the View is wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't done in-depth studies of what technically people would consider to be Christian nationalism from a sociological point of view, but I think that there are people that have that attitude, and I think that attitude is wrong. Whether you attribute that to Christian nationalism or not, but does that make sense?
Yeah, when the term Christian nationalism gets thrown around, I it's so foreign from my normal way of talking about things and thinking about things. There are Christians, and there are, I suppose there are nationalists, but I'm not sure. I mean, usually I would think kind of like the word African American, you just, well, okay. I think I can figure out what that means from the words, but Christian nationalism, it doesn't seem like you can figure what it means out just from the words. Christian and nationalist. Anyway, I don't think there's anything wrong with being a nationalist, and I'm not sure what the best argument against that would be, but seems like if you're a red-blooded American, you like America. And right. I don't know if that means you like all nations, but just like you're happy that you have a nation, that's fine. And then how that fits in with Christianity, that's a different question, I guess. But Yeah, so it seems like it's such a technical word. It's gets a
Mhm.
little bit. It, I think the the number of people it would apply to in the hyper technical sense is so small. I'm not sure. I don't know why you'd feel like you had to respond to the view. But anyway, okay, that's me. But
Yeah, I mean, it is tricky because I would consider myself a, I mean, having served in the Marines where I sort of protect and defend the Constitution, I really
yeah,
believe in that. And I value what we have here in this great experiment that we call America, because
hmm,
I believe it is the greatest political system that has been tried in the history of the world. And I know not everybody believes that. I mean, I believe that, but I don't think that
well, you
my
take
allegiance.
yourself to be just describing the world. You take yourself to be at the level of description. Like this, all these other systems suck. They've led to bad outcomes, and then ours has some problems, but ours is the better one, right? I mean,
Right, and in
yeah.
principle, I mean, because of the Bill of Rights and things like this, but I don't take that. I don't take my allegiance to the United States to be greater than my allegiance to Jesus or anything like that. And I think that uh, there are people who make those priorities fuzzy, and I think those are the people that Austin's attacking. And what I'm saying is I agree that there are people who have attitudes about that they have their priority with respect to their theology and their belief in the value of our political system sort of
Mhm.
fuzzily defined. Those are
What's unique
not.
about our system is not really the Bill of Rights. The Soviet Union had a Bill of Rights. There's all sorts of really horrible places that have bills of rights.
Mm,
What's different about our system is the separation of powers.
right.
The Soviet Union did not have a separation of powers. And what I notice is the left doesn't like separation of powers. And so, what the Second Amendment embodies, that right there, is a separation of power in a way.
Mm,
It's not the same thing that you see in the original Constitution with Article 1, 2, and 3, but you have a separation between government, which is consistent throughout the Constitution, I would say, except for the case of slavery. But but even then, that was resolved,
mm,
in a way that was consistent with the rest of it,
mm,
thanks to the Republican Party and the Civil War. But that, and by the way, that had a lot to do with arming people,
mm,
making sure people can have arms. So the idea of the citizen versus the government, the people versus the government, that's the fundamental separation of power
mm,
that that you need to make. That's what places like the Soviet Union, North Korea, People's Republic of China, really bad places, authoritarian regimes,
mm,
however you characterize them, totalitarian regimes. That that distinction between private and public, is so key in my view, and that's what I love about our system.
mm.
Anyway, I interrupted you. Sorry, you were in the middle
No,
of
that's all
something.
right. No, and I think that going back to uh, Locke's systematic argument for the conditions in which people form governments
Mhm.
and the purpose for which those governments exist, and giving criteria for the dissolution of those, because if the government ceases to serve the people, then the people have, he argues, a right to dissolve it in a certain way, and that is the basis for the idea that there should be this check, like you're mentioning, on the federal government,
Mhm.
or on the state, broadly speaking. And that check has to be one of force. And obviously, none of us hope that we find ourselves in a situation where that ever needs to be exercised. But in principle, if you give that up, once you give it up, you never get it back. And I saw a documentary years ago about, they were interviewing people in Australia about the gun ban there and everything, and a lot of those people that they interviewed were saying, hey, once you give that up, just know you're never going to get it back.
Mhm.
And I think that's why there's such an entrenched fight to resist gun control laws, because people do perceive that it's a slippery slope. In the book, Austin says, he kind of dismisses that and says like, oh, it's, people say that it's a slippery slope, but that's not reasonable. Despite later saying that there's no guarantee that a government will become totalitarian, and so it sort of undercuts itself there. But anyway, I do agree that it's a very important check on governmental power in principle. So one of the related to that.
Yeah, and I mean, there's. Go ahead. Go ahead and develop your point that you're going to make.
I've lost it. Sorry. Go ahead. I'm too young for that, but go ahead.
I do appreciate that in the book, Mike, and I said this in my review when I reviewed it online, that he probably the best part of the book is the stuff that you can tell he used in his logic classes, probably. It's chapter 3 of the book, which is just evaluating arguments and displaying one or two classic fallacies for the world to see somehow lodged in this Second Amendment debate that we're having. A lot of sloppy sloganeering and stuff going on. And so I appreciate the slogan, the ideology of a slogan and getting underneath what's really at the issue. I like that. I think that that's good. And so if someone was to find the book, I wouldn't buy it new, but if you found it used at a bookstore and you saw chapter 3, then that would be very profitable, I think, for you. You could use that in a logic class or something like that. So I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think it's a very useful introduction to people that aren't familiar with the gun debate, because he touches on a lot of different things. So there's a lot to begin thinking about there. I realize it's not an academic book, or it's not designed to be
well, he does have a PhD in philosophy from University of Colorado Boulder.
He does, but he's not writing to academics.
No.
He's writing to lay people.
Trying to actually influence the voting, I think, is what he's trying to do. He does take the Democratic Party line on that side of things. So the
certainly on the policy.
Yeah, absolutely. He's definitely on the Democratic Party side of that. So I didn't want to cut you off. You were in the middle of saying, did you have any praise or criticism of the book that was negative beyond what we're talking about? What do you think the heart of the book is, if you had to say?
I think the heart of the book is that he wants people to think about these things, but he doesn't make an attempt. He doesn't portray the book as being completely even-handed. It's not here's the two sides, here's all the data, make your decision. It's we should be thoughtful, and I concede that there are some points here, but you should think like this, right? Which is his right to do. But because I felt like he gave such a cursory overview, or provided cursory criticisms of some things that, in my view, do have very strong data-driven arguments or principled arguments backing them, I kind of felt like it wasn't up to par with where somebody as a philosophy professor should have placed their rigor, right? So, for example, the intro to the book by Rob Schenck begins with him expressing horror that there's a company he saw that marketed holsters for firearms that looked like zipper Bible cases, right? And presumably the horror there is because we're mixing these images of like this thing that could be used to commit violence with something like the Bible, which the image there obviously is a powerful one, but when you think about it, it should only be something that's shocking if you already think that people shouldn't carry firearms in church. If you've already come to that conclusion, then yes, of course it's shocking. But if you think that there are reasonable, there are good reasons to carry a firearm in church, and even ethical reasons to do so, then what do you care about the color or the make of the thing holding the firearm? The question should be, is it a practical tool meet its practical end? And so, they make a lot of this imagery, and it makes it sound like it's this, like there are these people who are trying to advance Christianity by carrying guns around or something. And that's just not, I don't think that's the attitude that most people have who do carry in church. I think the attitude most people have is, I'm at church to worship Jesus, but if I was presented with a situation where I felt I could defend myself or somebody else who would otherwise be harmed or killed, then I'd be willing to do that. I don't think most people are glorifying in that. I think there are those people, and those people ought to be criticized for their attitude, but I don't think that's the majority. And he kind of makes it sound like people who carry in church shouldn't and have the wrong attitude about it. So I don't like that aspect of the book.
To what extent do you think that data, you've mentioned data several times.
Mm-hmm.
To what extent do you think data is relevant to some of these policy questions? I mean, he says he does believe you have a right to own a gun, but ironically, that's not really the main debate. That was settled by the Supreme Court, and he doesn't really evaluate those decisions very well. I was very disappointed by his treatment of the Supreme Court decisions.
Heller and McDonald.
Yeah, there's nothing in there about the plaintiffs in those cases, for example.
Right. He sort of says, well,
yeah,
the Supreme Court overturned precedent that was set before in 2008.
That's actually not correct either. That's not correct as a matter of law. But anyway, yeah, I mean, it's probably not clear. That might be a better way to say it, because yes, it did overturn precedent in terms of the DC law. Yeah, that was overturned in Heller. But when he talks about prior Supreme Court decisions, well, anyway, we'd have to get into the exact language he uses, because I think he says it a little bit differently than that. But what I'm talking about is so let's say you're talking about the definition of marriage, and let's say that you're a Democrat maybe, or you're a Republican on the side of the Democrats, like Justice Kennedy was in Obergefell. And Obergefell was the decision in 2015 which redefined marriage. And let's say that as a part of that strategy, that you go to Loving versus Virginia and you talk about the decision that overturned interracial marriage bans or something like that. It would be odd if you described that groundbreaking decision in Loving versus Virginia as going against precedent, and as if that's a bad thing. And
right, because the intent is that,
and not paying any attention. Yeah, and not paying any attention to the plaintiffs in that case, what the harm was that they were suffering, that the law was addressing, that the decision, I'm saying, by the Supreme Court was addressing and redressing that harm. And he's totally insensitive to these plaintiffs in this case. And I'm not sure if it's just ignorance or if that just is really his heart. I have no idea, because you can't tell from reading the book. But in the case of McDonald versus Chicago, it was a black man in Chicago who was told by the city of Chicago that you cannot have a handgun for self-defense. You must wait for the police. The police are your bodyguard. And he said, and the record is, it's there, you can read it, hello.
Right.
That what if it takes 20 minutes for the police to get there? Doesn't matter. Now, if you are on the 4-member dissent of that, you're unfazed. And they were, that's when the Democrats were on the 4 dissenting. The Republicans were the ones on the Supreme Court that were on the side of the black man against the city, against the government, who said he has to use the police. I mean, it's hard to even imagine that this is happening. It's 2010 in America, so long after the Civil War, put guns in the hands of black people so that they wouldn't be enslaved and they could fight against the Klan and Reconstruction and all that stuff.
Mm.
And it's just those kind of details are utterly and totally lost on
Right.
Mr. Austin, Dr. Austin. Not to
Yeah,
mention, I mean, the NRA was founded by Union officers in 1871. I mean, they just fought this war. So what you were going to say?
I was going to say that's one of the frustrating things about the book is that someone who isn't familiar with a lot of the background of these cases or the gun debate in general,
Yeah.
and just reads the book would come away thinking like, well, this makes a lot of sense. You know,
Yeah.
why do we have these crazy?
I mean,
maybe. But there's so
Yeah.
much more to the nuances of those cases and of the data. You know, again, a lot of the policy decisions that the policy suggestions he's making are and should be driven by data. But I think a lot of the ones he makes are fly in the face of what the data actually say. But you get the sense in the book that, you know, he says he's not against the Second Amendment. He doesn't want to ban guns. But you get the sense that if for example, Heller was reversed or something, that he would just kind of shrug his shoulders and, you know, would be kind of okay
dissent,
with it.
the dissent in Heller, the dissent in McDonald versus Chicago, they thought they were on the side of the Second Amendment too. And they thought that the Second Amendment means that the government has a police power right to criminalize effective self-defense, which is exactly what those plaintiffs happened to them. They were criminalized for defending themselves. In other words, innocent conduct, paradigmatic innocent conduct, self-defense, and the right to self-defense is a right to effective self-defense. It's not merely a right to try and fail. I mean, you do have a right to try and fail, right? But you also have a right to try and succeed in defending yourself. And that's really the heart of the Second Amendment, which is what I'm on the side of Heller and McDonald. I think they got that part right. The court did. I think there's some problems in those decisions with some of the dicta, some of the stuff that Scalia said, for example. It's a little bit weird. It's not clear that it's consistent with, there's a consistent police power theory of the police power. Police power is you have to have a theory of the police power. That's what I love about this guy that wrote, this guy at Georgetown, his name is Randy Barnett, and he wrote this book on the 14th Amendment, and he recently spoke at Cato about it. It's online. You could probably dig it up. It's recently in the last several months. And he said, you have to have a theory of the police power. And I'm not sure that I know for a fact I don't agree with Dr. Austin's theory of the police power. And I'm not sure it's consistent with some of what he says he believes in. You know, so I think that it's wrong to criminalize innocent conduct. And that's exactly where I think we disagree. Is I think and when you try to baptize it in Christian language, I think that's even more horrific. Like as if this is what God would want. God would want you to be a criminal for defending yourself. I don't think the government has the power to make you a criminal for doing something that's innocent.
Right.
Self-defense is paradigmatically innocent. So
I have two thoughts about that. One, related to his policy suggestion that we repeal stand your ground laws. He makes a lot of, he does not like stand your ground laws, and he doesn't like them because he thinks it basically provides legal protection for people to exercise racial prejudices. And presumably he thinks that because he cited, I think without a footnote, that whites in stand your ground, or blacks in stand your ground laws, states with stand your ground laws were killed at a much higher rate, like 11 times more than whites in self-defense scenarios or something like that, without noting that in many states, especially states like Illinois, because of Chicago and where there's very high crime in urban areas, mostly due to gang violence, that most of the murders are committed by people that are minorities, right? And that's just, you can look at the FBI data on this. which would explain a disparity like that, right? Rather than racial prejudice. Now, stand your ground laws don't allow people, it does not absolve someone who's defending themselves from providing proof that they had a reasonable belief or feeling that they were in imminent harm. You know, all it means is that you don't have a legal obligation to retreat in those circumstances.
Yeah.
So I really don't understand the criticism there, and I don't think that the criticism that he makes is warranted based on what we do know about stand your ground laws and how you're still required to provide proof that you to a jury that you had a reasonable expectation you were going to be harmed, you know, fatally.
Yeah. Yeah, and I appreciate that a lot. I think that's very well said. I appreciate you bringing up stand your ground laws. I think the concern that Democrats have that a private person might harbor racial prejudice against another private person is it's fine to have that on your radar, but the bigger issue is how the government treats people. That's really what the bigger issue is how the government, what the government is allowed to do to that individual. And when you create a duty for a Black person to retreat when attacked, you open up the door for all sorts of racial prejudice and harm against that person. And and it's even worse because that person is the victim. That person is the one getting attacked. And now all of a sudden the person getting attacked has a duty not to defend themselves in that space without considering whether they can retreat. And I don't know why you would want to inculcate in Black person that they have a duty to retreat from being attacked or a duty. I mean, I'm right here. Here I am. I'm right here. Why do I have any duty whatsoever when I'm attacked to leave this space? I don't understand that. What does that communicate to the person attacking me?
Right.
It's just weird. It's just super weird. And so what you do is you open up prosecutorial discretion, and there is a thing called prosecutorial discretion, and the word is discretion. I use the word discretion because it means a prosecutor can decide to prosecute you if you did stand your ground. And a prosecutor might decide, I don't want to prosecute you if you didn't. And it could be based on race. And there's nothing you could do about it. Whereas if you take the criminal element away from the victim, okay, let's I think Mike Austin gets this totally wrong. The basic distinction between criminal and victim. At base view, he has an adulterated view of what a criminal is and an adulterated view of what a victim is. The way I think of it is if somebody is being attacked, that person is the victim.
Right.
Okay? Not a criminal, a victim. But this mentality is, no, they're a criminal if they have 11 rounds in their magazine.
Right.
So what are you talking about? 11 rounds makes me a criminal. What are you talking about? Now, if you rack the magazine, 10-round magazine, you got one in the chamber, and then you take that magazine out, put a 10th round in. See if you can follow this. There's still 11 rounds. That is paradigmatic. You're an Eagle Scout. You're a model citizen. You have one more round in there. Let's say your magazine malfunctions and you can have one more round in there. You're now a criminal. You, the victim, are a criminal. And it doesn't
make a lot of sense to me.
I mean, that's fundamentally, it must be a difference of intuition. His intuition is, yes, that's not innocent conduct, that's criminal conduct. My intuition is that's innocent conduct. The law should recognize that. And to the extent that the law doesn't recognize that, the law is invalid. The law is
I mean,
not really law. It's legislation, but it's not law.
it's just really hard to understand how, if having a magazine with too many rounds, let's say more than 10 in California, is a misdemeanor, why somebody who's intent on committing a felony, namely murder, would care about violating, committing a misdemeanor in the course of committing a felony. It just doesn't, conceptually, it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And there's no evidence to show that,
it's so odd. It's like if I had to use a knife, God forbid, I had to use a knife in self-defense, and there was legislation, and actually knife legislation is almost, I think, just as badly incoherent. It's just that knife laws are not uniformly enforced as much. They can be selectively enforced, and that's why I'm very suspicious of knife regulations, because they're just basically, according to prosecutorial discretion, you could easily just abuse that along racial lines. And I don't think it's actually worse for the government to abuse something on racial lines. I think if the government is treating an innocent person as a criminal, it doesn't matter what race or what reason it is. That's always wrong for the same reason. It's not only wrong when you do it to Black people, it's wrong if you do it to anybody.
Right.
Anyway, so imagine if you had a serrated edge and you're only allowed 10 serrations on that serrated edge, but yours has 11, manufacturer defect. And now in this encounter, I mean, you can imagine if you had to use a knife in self-defense. Can you imagine? First of all, you're in total trauma. Yeah, you're not a sociopath. I mean, it's not like you're just standing there, like wondering when you can finish your solitaire game. You're bloody. This is a disgusting encounter that you just had on every level. You're a victim.
First rule of a knife fight is you're going to get cut.
Yeah. You're standing there, and the police are counting the serration. See, why is that an aspect of the investigation? I don't understand. You're
missing the spirit of the law, for sure.
Yeah, you're complicating it. Right. And the same thing with if they take your pistol into evidence and they're trying to see how many rounds you can fit. That's missing the point. It's like if you get, here's an analogy. You're pulled over for running a stop sign, let's say. Maybe, well, it's not a perfect analogy, unlike all the other analogies I have, but actually there are no such thing as perfect analogies.
My analogy of the Trinity is perfect.
Yeah, let's say you're pulled over for some kind of traffic offense, like running a stop sign. And now the guy is like, how many gallons of gas can you fit in your gas tank? Is it only 10? And you're like, actually, it's a standard model. We haven't blocked the gas tank to only 10. It was designed to hold 13 gallons, and I never blocked the gas tank to 10. So it's now an aspect of the investigation of remember, the investigation has to do with me running a stop sign, right? Very clear. Now we're inquiring, now the government is intruding and inquiring on such things as how many things that are totally irrelevant. And all you're doing is you're just giving the government more discretion to hurt innocent people. And that's going to hurt you. If you do that, it's going to hurt innocent people.
Well, that's the scary thing about a state like California, where if you did need to use a firearm in self-defense, you better believe the state would be looking at all of those technicalities. And, was he within 1,000 feet of a school? Yes, he was. Well, then, he's going to jail, even though everything else circumstantially justified the use of force. Those sorts of things just totally miss. You're not getting the bad guys. You know what I mean? You're hurting the people that you should be protecting with the law.
Yeah.
So I wonder if we could talk about the central thesis of his book, if you figure about
sure.
for that. He wants to construe a third in-between view as being the right way, being a peace builder in between just war theory and being a pacifist, right? And he says he's not a pacifist, but if you listen to his interviews, he says he's basically as close to a pacifist as you can be without being one. And by the way, I respect people who are pacifists. I think that it's a consistent position. I don't agree with it. I think pacifists fail to appreciate the distinction between self-defense scenarios and the proper context for martyrdom, because I think those things aren't incompatible with one another. But what's interesting is that the way he describes peace building to me sounds just like just war theory properly exercised, right? So he basically says just war theory says you have to have certain conditions to justify violence in the context of war, self-defense, but most just war theorists don't adhere to those. And so it seems odd that you would justify criticism of a philosophy by pointing to cases in which it's been abused. But Augustine is known as one of the founders of the thinking that underlies current just war theory.
What was his first name? What was that guy's first name that you mentioned? Augustine? What was his first name? Street? I think it was Street. What? Street Augustine?
I'm not following
you. St.
Saint Augustine?
You ever mailed a letter? You've never mailed a letter?
Sorry, I had some delayed intelligence on that one. Yeah, I got you.
Is it Saint? That would actually make sense. It actually makes more sense.
Or Augustine.
Oh, that's why my professor was looking at me weird when I called him Drive instead of Doctor. Okay, sorry. Actually, his first name was Aurelius Augustine.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay.
So, if you for example, in a letter to Boniface, letter 138, Augustine says
I think it's actually Bony Face. Actually.
Oh, there you go. Well,
it was his.
Learn new things every day.
It was his nickname from childhood, and then it just stuck. Bony Face.
Yeah, it certainly would have been if he was in third grade. But I have it here. Augustine says to him, he says, peace should be the object of your desire. War should be waged only as a necessity, and waged only that God may by it deliver men from the necessity and preserve them in peace. Now, that sounds a lot like what Austin describes as being a peace builder. And so I wonder why he's trying to eke out this third view. I just don't understand why he doesn't just say we ought to be just war theorists and we just ought to be clear and consistent about the criteria for exercising violence. So I don't know what
that's a very thoughtful. That's thoughtful. I don't know what he would say to that because he's not here, and I mean, it's like it's hard to talk to the guy when he won't come on your show or your podcast. I don't really call it a show, but I maybe we'll get him to come on and respond to that at some point. But I'd be
interested in that.
I don't know to what extent he's got a certain audience in mind, and they happen to be like a lot of them are Democrats or something, or they're Republicans that are on the Democrat side on this. But I don't know. I'm not sure how much street cred that pacifism has for those people. I'm not sure, but I noticed that too. I think it's a good way to put it, that maybe it's just good old-fashioned theory of violence in the Christian tradition. There's lots there. I mean, it seems like perfectly relevant. But
and I agree. I agree with him. We ought to have the right attitude towards those things. We oughtn't be cavalier about exercising violence or glorifying that or anything like that, for sure.
I'm much more concerned about the attitude that the government has, though. That's always my central concern. Is I'm a pastor to the government. I mean, yeah, it's great. I mean, we should spur each other on to live more faithfully, sure. But man, when you're talking about policy application, you're talking about empowering the government.
Right.
And that's really what bothers me is what kind of powers are you giving the government and why? And maybe you don't think that there's like a slippery slope that's real,
Mm.
but the history of the world in terms of governments, it's not a pretty picture. Most
Right.
fail, and in any given time slice, it's sometimes hard to decide what the direction is. Like, for example, the United Kingdom or Canada or Australia, what direction are they going?
Mm.
What is their theory of the police power?
Right.
How's that affect flourishing in those communities?
I'm not optimistic about the direction that governments tend to go
Yeah.
when they're given the power to take people's firearms, or just in other governments
or to
where
prevent you under threat of prosecution, to prevent you from actually using it in public.
Exactly.
Carrying it, being prepared. I don't know. And by the way, I think a culture where people are not criminalized for being prepared to effectively respond to immoral violence. It's another criticism I have, I'll get to in a second. Don't let me forget, coming back to immoral violence, as opposed to gun violence. I don't like the term gun violence.
Because gun violence isn't worse than other kinds of violence.
Well, let me get back to that. I forget what I was going. I guess I could just talk about it right now.
Sorry, I didn't mean to derail.
No, that's all right. It's fine. Gun violence. He uses that term, starts using it right away. Violence per se is not immoral.
Unjustified violence.
Yeah, I think what he means is immoral violence. That's what he means.
Mm-hmm.
But immoral violence would be immoral violence, whatever is used, right? The problem
being murdered by a gun is not worse than being murdered by a knife.
I mean, not
morally speaking,
not to the person getting murdered. I don't think in the eyes of the law it should be worse either.
Right.
I here I am showing my hand about hate crimes. I think that their hate crimes are very popular in certain populations. I don't see that it does anything to fight crime, though. I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what's the problem with a so-called hate crime? Is the problem that the person is murdered, or is it the problem of the reason the person is murdered? To me, if it's murder, it's not justified, right? It's immoral violence, right? So what if it was a deeply held belief that certain races are inferior to other races? I mean, what does that have to do with the fact that this other person suffered immorally, not suffered immorally, but suffered due to some immoral violence? Anyway, I just don't see that. Is it better to be murdered by somebody who loves you? Let's love violence. I mean, is that illegal? We should make love violence illegal. Hate, love crimes. No, mommy, no. Remember, you love me. Remember, it doesn't matter. I mean, it's just it's murder. Murder's murder. When you read the 10 Commandments, it doesn't say, and it's especially you shouldn't murder someone. It's like extra. Now I'm being extra serious here, guys, Israelites. Okay, not only do not murder. Okay, we got that. But extra califragilistically, seriously, you should not murder someone based on race. Doesn't say anything like that. Same with stealing. Thou shalt not steal. But also extra, no, don't. It's just go. It's simple. Just go back. Criminal victim.
Right.
You have immoral violence. You have. So when he says gun violence, the problem is that analytically, that includes self-defense with a firearm, because if you're defending yourself, that's a violent encounter.
Right. Right.
It's violent every time a gun goes off. It's just violent. Doesn't mean that it's bad.
The question is it moral or immoral violence, not whether it's violence. Yeah.
I think so. Sometimes we use the term violent to mean just bad. And
now,
that's a bias for pacifism.
Right. So for someone who's a pacifist, I could understand that construal, but for somebody who's avidly or explicitly not a pacifist like he is, I don't understand.
That's
a deliberate rhetorical move. I don't understand the use of that, because it's not careful in the ways that you're pointing out. And this is the problem with a lot of firearm statistics. If you do cross country comparisons of homicides and things like that, a lot of countries don't distinguish between justified homicide and murders. They just say this is the total homicide rate.
Right.
And so it makes it difficult to know, what's really happening.
Right.
In certain circumstances.
That's right.
And so, not to bleed too far into something else here, but related to that, I mean, obviously John Lott has done a lot of work, over decades on the subject, and he spends in the book 3 pages dismissing all of that. He cites Hugh La Follette in his book and some other things, but I just thought that just seems irresponsible to take somebody who spent decades doing peer-reviewed research, and maybe there are some challenges there that need to be worked out, but I don't think you should make a habit of dismissing people who've spent their life doing a certain thing and say like, oh, well, some people disagree, so you should just discount that.
It's the same way that Thomas Sowell is treated. Thomas Sowell has debunked so many of these fallacious ways of thinking about race and economics long time ago. Him and actually Walter Williams as well. And he's just pretty much ignored. I don't know how else to explain it, except for there's a bias toward Democrats in higher education, and I think that's a simple explanation. But I think the simple explanation is to be preferred if it's the best one. It seems like it's the best one. I don't see a better one that's more complicated. But I think he just now I know he is pro-life on abortion, so he he's got the right answer on that. But again, he's not here to defend himself. My thought on like Democrats is they're typically the way I've been treated is they're dismissive. They don't really respond. They're just dismissive. And there's a groupthink, there's a bias, there's a pretty steep bias.
Well, that's the whole underlying aspect of the cancel culture, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I don't agree with you, so I'm just not going to let you talk.
Yeah. When I was,
and I don't think that's his attitude, certainly, but I mean,
no. He's not that far. No. He's not that far. But I think he doesn't like Republicans, and he's trying to move Christians away from the Republican. I think he wants Christians to be more Democrat. I think. You
certainly get that sense. In this book, at least.
But so I think I'm just calling it like it is. I'm just describing it. I'm not really, but I think I'll give him another compliment. I think, because I don't want people to just think I'm just beating up on Mike Austin here.
Yeah, same here.
I'll give him another compliment. I think that he had some excellent training at Biola, and it's hard to take the training that we got at Biola, just amazing training and epistemology and metaphysics and philosophy of mind, and you had symbolic logic. That's cool. Back in my day, Rob Coons was teaching symbolic logic, so I audited that class. That was Pickavance's advisor at Texas. So you had I had Yoda. You had Master Luke, ironically. But
Master Luke was pretty good.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. People call me Master Luke. Well, when it's hard to go from that great training to figure out, what do you think about politics and constitutional law? And this is definitely politics and constitutional law. And how do you integrate that with your Christian faith? I think Biola was scared to wade into those waters for accreditation reasons, and there's all sorts of other reasons why he might be afraid of that.
You mean even teaching political philosophy? Seems
I
like
think
they wouldn't be worried about that.
I think it just because I don't know. I mean, I might be wrong. I might be totally wrong. I mean, maybe it was just that it's just a matter of, you can only do so many things really well, and we're going to focus on what we do really well. And I don't know, but I think that he probably went from Biola to Boulder, and
Quite a contrast, I'm sure.
yeah, had to figure out all of a sudden. Although I've heard Mike Humer has guns, so I don't know, and he teaches at Boulder. I haven't talked to Mike Humer. I did like his book on perception and skepticism.
I listened to a lecture he did, a debate with Michael Shermer, but I haven't read any of his work.
Yeah. Well, I think he has guns. So anyway,
he said so in the debate.
Did he?
No, somebody asked him, and he declined to say which or what kind. But,
yeah. Well, there you go. That's evidence that he has guns. Well, it's tough to integrate this stuff with your Christian faith and do so in a compelling way that avoids some of the claptrap, the worst of politics. And so I mean, the compliment that I would give Mike Austin is that he did wade into that, and he tried, and I think that he has he has at least one good chapter in there, chapter 3. I was a little disappointed, like you said, in he knows how to make distinctions. He's professionally trained philosopher. He can ratchet down on these distinctions. He knows how to analyze terms, and he's just using gun violence just the same way that Democrats do, and he's not being careful with how he's using the terms, and it seems like a lot of the policy stuff gets kind of smuggled into assumptions that are not critically laid bare.
Right.
So that's, but and then here's an unfair criticism of his book, perhaps, but I almost threw the book away because it doesn't have any pictures in it. And
that's fair.
That's why I don't have very many Bibles left. I got a Precious Moments Bible. It's got pictures in it. So, but anyway,
you've got a version of the message with the text blown up real big, so it's almost like pictures.
Well, Matt, is there anything else you wanted to cover before we take off for today?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I don't have an agenda or anything like that. I'm grateful for the opportunity to chat about it. There's, I'm sure, a lot more we could get into here, and I'm sure if Mike were talks about some of these things, to say the least, but hopefully he'll join you at some point on the show. And I appreciate the work that you're doing, and I've listened to some great interviews that you guys have had in the past, and so keep doing what you're doing.
I really appreciate that, Matt. Thanks for coming on, and we'll catch you on the flip side. Happy Easter.
Sounds great. Happy Easter.